Oh, there we go.
There we go. It's 7 o'clock and it's Thursday. That can mean one thing and one thing only. You're in the Lyons Den. And I'm George Lyons. And I've missed you guys the last few weeks. I've been a little busy and I have not been able to get on the air and share some time with you. So, to make up for that, I've got a very, very, very special young lady with us today. In fact, her and I have been sitting here for the last half an hour, and she's been educating me, if you can possibly imagine that. She's impressive, she's educated, she's thoughtful, she cares about the environment, and I'm going to shut up now and allow her to introduce herself. Dr. Singh, please.
Yeah, my name is Shikha Singh, and I'm the invasive species biologist, invasive species biologist coordinator for the JLW SISMA. And it's a bunch of letters, but what those letters stand for is Jackson, Lenawee, Washtenaw Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And so I cover, Jackson, Lenawee, and Washtenaw counties. And my job involves working with invasive species.
Very good.
Yeah.
And excuse me, I'm trying to do something here, and I'm making a complete mess of it, so I'm going to stop. Doctor, George, will you take care of that for me, please? Forgive me, I was trying to be technologically suave, and I made a mess of it. Let's go way back, Doc, because we've had a discussion, and you have your road from where you began to where we sit today is just an incredible one. So share with us, are you from Jackson originally?
No, I'm from Canada. So my hometown is London, Ontario, so it's about 3 hours away from Lake Lansing. If you actually draw a line between Detroit and Toronto, like a straight diagonal line, like we're kind of like in the middle of that line.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city.
Oh, I'm in Toronto.
Yeah. No. London's a great place.
London is actually nice. We've actually been there.
Yeah.
And it is a fantastic place. But tell me about the young Dr. Singh growing up in Canada. How was that? Because Michiganders have a different perspective on Canadians. Share that with us, please.
Yeah. So to the chagrin of my parents, I was a loud, active child, and always, exploring, getting up, get involved in mischief. I remember my mom. I think I was always inquisitive. So one of the personality traits that I have is I'm very curious about a lot of things. I'm always asking questions. Why? What is that? And that characteristic has followed me up until now. I'm the one who's like stopping every 5 minutes, taking a picture of that random plant.
Okay.
What's that bug? Because I'm going to go home and try to identify it.
Wow.
And I want to know. I want to know, and curiosity. I wanted to learn how to make my own foods and stuff. So that was developed, early on as a child, and my parents indulged in it, and they encouraged it, and yeah, I'm a child of immigrants, so my parents immigrated to Canada from India, and
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I guess the big question: have you ever been to India?
Yes,
Okay.
I have been a few times, but unfortunately, this is growing up. It's like immigrant family. My dad, was a hardworking professor, and going to traveling across the ocean is very expensive. So it's we didn't get a chance to go every year or anything. Right. So I went every several years.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful country. It's a lot of cultural aspects made its way into my life from that country. Obviously, any parent who's an immigrant or coming to the country, you're going to have those traditions passed down and those interests. So yeah, I was a first generation, I guess.
Good enough.
You could say.
So your dad's a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And what's his area of expertise?
He was in mechanical engineering.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not really sure. It's something about plates, shells, vibrations, I think is what his topics were, but that's the extent of it.
Okay. So you never were interested in the mechanical engineering?
I was interested, in all sorts of, things like in science and engineering, like how things moved. I had fond memories playing with Lego, with my brother. He's an engineer.
I was going to ask you.
Somebody in my family, my brother is an engineer. And
so one of you guys was going to do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it was him, and my brother is very smart,
Okay.
and he had a passion for mechanical engineering as well.
But he went to Michigan, right?
No, yeah, he and that's I can be politically correct as well, but University of Michigan, it's a really great school. Michigan State is a great school, and
Okay.
the important thing is you get your education and you do something good with it, right?
It is. I'm just having fun.
I know.
So your pop was an engineer, and I'm assuming now he's tenured.
Yeah, he's retired now.
Oh.
He was tenured, yeah, and he's retired.
He's good and tenured.
Yeah.
Okay. And what did your mom do?
My mom was a housewife.
Okay.
And she did do lunchroom supervision. So when I was growing up, my mom every lunch I would go to the classroom that she did supervision for, and I'd grab my homemade lunch. These are things that you appreciate now as an adult, but when you're a kid, you're like, I want that junk food and everybody else gets, but no, my mom, I had my glass of fresh milk, and so yeah, my mom was she did that for many years, even after I had passed through my schooling years, and both my parents are very community minded. They were really involved in their temple, a lot of good work and hard work in supporting those efforts. So yeah, they were plenty busy raising kids and doing some community.
So
work.
just you and your brother.
Mm-hmm.
And what's his name?
And my dog. I had a chocolate lab
dog,
growing up.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't talk about the kids in that Singh family without mentioning my dog Fudge.
Oh, Fudge.
Yeah, he's a chocolate lab.
Okay.
You were the brown family with the brown dog.
So tell me, how old is Fudge?
He unfortunately passed away when I was after undergrad, so that was a long time ago.
I'm
but
sorry, I don't know.
no. But he, but you're talking about the three. There's my brother, my dog, and myself. My dog had a higher place in the family than I did, and that's okay with me.
You must be the baby.
I was the youngest, yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is that this inquisitiveness has just been a part of your persona.
Yeah.
Okay. And at some point, since you obviously did not gravitate toward engineering, did you begin to gravitate towards sciences?
Yeah, and one of the things that I would actually, I don't know who's watching out there, the age, the demographics, but science, when I was growing up, I don't think it was taught very well. It was one of those things, you get an old textbook, you memorize stuff, you try to regurgitate stuff, and I know I wasn't the strongest science actually when I was younger.
Okay.
And if you have young people out there and you're at school and you have some 60%, some 70%, that doesn't matter, because if you have the drive, the ethic, you can, if you work hard, and there are a lot more resources now out there to teach science. And so I wasn't the strongest, admittedly, in science, when I was a kid, but it wasn't really that interesting. I guess that's kind of my point, So I didn't really have that much interest until I got to about high school, and I was applying to university. And one of the issues that really got to me is I loved my dog, I loved animals, and that kind of had a passion in me to protect the environment. I saw a news program long time ago, and they had built some sort of an overpass in Alberta, and it was basically meant so that animals had to cross it so they could cross over the highway. And so that really inspired me. I'm like, what a cool idea. Our impact on the environment is so great.
I've never heard of that. They had an overpass for the animals.
Yeah, and just something for animals to cross, because you had bears and moose and all sorts of even raccoons, and you never know. You have all these fatalities, and Alberta was not the only one that did it, but I had happened to see this news piece. We watched CBC, that was our news, and they would have some of these programs about conservation, and I grew up watching National Geographic, so I always had a love for the environment. And my dad and my mom, they took us camping. They didn't have a lot of experience in terms of the hunting and fishing. There's a lot of rules, regulations. So my dad's like, I want to do it, but you don't want to do anything wrong, right? So if you don't know, then you can't just catch a fish anywhere you want, and licensing is required. And So it is complicated for families that are not used to enjoying and working in their natural resources. If you don't have a family history of hunting, fishing, hiking, and camping, it's very hard for new families or immigrant families to kind of come in and take that up. And so I was lucky that my dad, was also enjoyed natural resources, and that's kind of where these different incidences spoke to me, and I wanted to go into science.
Okay. Well, it's just science in general, or were you leaning toward the issues of conservation or med school or?
No. I was definitely more interested in ecology. Things like biochemistry, chemistry. Those things were too small. You couldn't really. It didn't excite me. I couldn't.
Okay.
I couldn't picture it in my mind. For me personally, I could picture, a vision like saving animals and protecting the environment, and everybody has their own passion. And for me, some of these, biochemistry and cell biology, amazing fields, all that. But it just wasn't my thing, right? I was concentrated, more interested in ecology.
So when you were in undergrad, did you get involved in groups that were into the ecology and conservation and things like that?
Well, and here's the thing, I look young, but I'm not exactly, that young. So back then we didn't have, social media. We didn't, we barely had, email. And, half my professors were still using the slides.
Oh, come on.
Oh yeah, I'm serious. And then a couple of them had PowerPoints with the blue background and the yellow font.
Oh my.
So to get to your point, it's like, there were clubs, but it was hard to kind of to navigate and know where all those clubs were. I was involved in something, the Humane Society Club, so fundraising for abused animals, and so I did that for 4 years. And then I, like to exercise and swim and stuff. So
you got your bachelor's degree at home in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And your bachelor's is in what specifically?
Biology.
Okay. So now, here's where it gets really cool.
Mm-hmm.
You decide to come south.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan State. Why Michigan State?
Michigan State has a really good fisheries and wildlife program, and my dad, my dad is influential in many ways in my, ideas for education and passion for, community and stuff. He knew that I was interested in conservation and the environment, and he, was looking around on the internet for different programs, and he said, here's this really nice program. And, when I was in university, we had things like biology, cell biology, and, basic zoology. But fisheries and wildlife was really interesting because it was more of an applied, field. You learn a lot of stuff, and you can actually go into, learn how to manage human dimensions, looking at people in the environment, because like I said, we have a big impact on society, human beings. So it had a very strong and diverse program in terms of content and education. And, I got lucky. I got a chance, an opportunity to work with Dr. Joan Rose, and she took me on as a master's student, and where I, did my water quality, and a lot of field work. My master's was looking at fecal indicator bacteria in sediment and surface water in the Grand River.
Let's come back there.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you right there because that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is that? Because now are you talking about our drinking water?
I actually looked at, fecal indicator bacteria, meaning like E. coli, fecal coliforms, enterococci. I looked at Clostridium perfringens and coliphage virus. Coliphage virus is, basically it's an indicator for recent sewage. It doesn't last very long. So I basically looked for these, bacteria and that one virus in the sediment and the surface water of the Grand River.
Why is that important?
Well, that's where people, that surface water gets pulled into our drinking water.
Okay.
People go swimming. We use it for agriculture. We want to make sure that our land use is not degrading that surface water. The Grand River, it leads into Lake Michigan.
Okay.
And so if we have poor water quality, it's bad for us, it's bad for the organisms that live in there.
Okay.
You know, the fish, and fishing is very important, you know, for economically for Michigan.
Okay.
So yeah, water quality is huge.
Okay. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that just that caught my attention.
Yeah.
When you said so part of what I think one of your areas of expertise.
Yeah, I looked at water quality, and you know that experience was great, and what are some of the problems, and then I wanted to turn over like, well, what can we actually do about it, and what are people doing about it? So my doctoral research was looking at planning and zoning documents, and what local governments were doing to protect and manage freshwater and invasive species.
Let me just ask you this, and this is something that we didn't get into earlier.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, and here's why. I'm from the Wayne County area, highly industrialized. You have the Fort Rouge plant. How does what you're talking about factor into that in terms of protecting the water?
Well, our water resources are challenged in a variety of ways. It could be directly, people dumping in sewage, or, when I was doing my master's, there was, incidents of combined sewer overflow. So when you had heavy rainfall, your sewage and like your stormwater would, discharge. And then you have, some of the typical, factories dumping out effluents, and, erosion occurring. So land use practices, you could have farming, agriculture. It could even be things like people spreading, manure that hasn't been properly processed yet. Maybe it could still have some bacteria that's making its way into the water when it rains. So, there's a whole bunch of things that are challenging our water resources, and I just, my research, was a small slice, so I wanted to know, basic things like, do you have a riparian buffer zone, or, so looking at planning and zoning.
Riparian, I have not heard that term since the first year of law school.
Yeah.
Riparian water rights.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm sorry to have to cut you off.
No.
But when you said water, it just caught my attention, because the one thing all of us have in common is the use of water. Daily, drinking it, bathing in it, swimming in it, the washing our clothes in it, etc. And I cut you off. Please continue.
No, and so that was, and my career path is definitely, it's a big story, water quality, water conservation, and, part of it now is like, well, I'm an invasive species, right? So now we also have another way that our environment is getting challenged is, invasive species. There are aquatic ones, there are terrestrial ones. And so what exactly is an invasive species? And this is a question I asked, when I do those booths and I go to community events, and I get a variety of answers. I get things like there are species that are endangered. Sometimes people, there's species that are not from here, which is correct. And, the official definition that we use, it's a species that's not from around here, and it has to cause some type of harm, whether that harm is economic harm, environmental harm, or harm to human health. And I can actually just quickly give you a good example of each of them. Economic harm could be, zebra mussel. You probably have heard about them all over. They clog up your pipes, they stick on your boats, and they're really expensive to remove, and so they also cause damage. And that's very expensive to get rid of. And
let me slow you down right there, only because now you're in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
I grew up fishing in the Detroit River, and to a smaller degree in Lake Erie, which is right next to it. And the zebra mussels got on everything. If you cast out into the water, you could bring back a whole line full of zebra mussels.
Yeah.
Where are they from? How the heck did they get here? And what, if anything, can be done to get rid of them?
Well, they are, from like the Black Sea. They are from from Europe, and they can be quite small, microscopic in sense. They can get into the ballast water. Ballast water is used to balance the ships when they cross the ocean, because you have to kind of maintain a weight. And so if your cargo is full of packages and whatnot, when you get to the next destination and you unload, all of a sudden you're lighter, so you have to kind of compensate with water. And so how you do that is you take up, maybe you take up water in one area, and then when you don't need it anymore, you release it somewhere else. And in that water, that's that's getting exchanged is a whole host of like plant matter. There could be like zebra mussels. You could also have things that are like stuck to the boat that might drop off on this passageway. So yeah, the shipping industry has brought in some of those things, and we have like the Welland Canal. We have all those canals now that have connected the Great Lakes. So at one point, like you had like Lake Ontario, the Sault Ste. Not Sault Ste. Marie, but the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Right.
So you had ships coming in there, and the boats were not able to kind of make it all the way through. And so when you have a series of canals, things that allowed boats to kind of navigate and then get into different areas, that allowed invasive species to come and go. Bridges and things allowed sea lamprey to kind of come up and down. So human activity did that as well. But once they actually got here and they got into some of these lakes, and all it took was people in their rowboats on their ships and fishing lines and get things getting stuck, and then going from fishing there to like, oh, this year to like tomorrow I'm gonna go fish in my little pond or my inland lake 2 miles from my house, after fishing in a Great Lake that has all these invasive species. And so some of these species can actually survive a couple of days out of water, especially if it's dark and if it's damp.
Right.
So people are able to transport invasive species that way.
Let me ask you this. This is absolutely. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. Question: the environment can sometimes balance the invasive thing that comes in. Is that possible, or is it always corruptive?
Well, that's, remember, if you go back to our definition, to be an invasive species, by definition, it has to cause some type of harm.
Right.
Now, you can have, there are certain environments, certain conditions that allow an invasive species to perhaps thrive. Maybe like disturbed areas, places that people, constantly come and go, park and hike, and, you got places where construction is occurring. So, again, you have construction equipment that's going from one area, they're digging holes, making things, and then they're like, oh well, 2 days from now I gotta go to my second job when I finish this job. And a lot of them, they don't decontaminate their equipment, they just go from one site to another. So invasive species move from like recreational activities, construction, landscaping opportunities. Like people are mowing lawns and then they don't clean out their lawnmower properly, and then they go to the next house, right? So a lot of our activities are bringing these invasive species to cause infestations. And sometimes like if it's here and if it's a small patch, if you hit them early, maybe if it needs some sort of a spray or a herbicide, or if it's an animal, you really do intensive trapping, and you can maybe get rid of it in that area that has, you can do that. But if you don't have the means and the mechanism to do it, or you don't know that that's an invasive species, it's going to get bigger, it's going to infest, and it's going to go. So that's kind of why I'm on here, is because the key to invasive species is to know what to address these issues in the beginning. And I don't have a map here, or a graph, but there's a graph that shows it's like an S shape, and so on the x-axis is time. And then I think the y-axis is like, the cost. Okay. And then the second y-axis is the amount of resources required. Okay. And what's going to happen is, early on, if it's a really small infestation and it just started, it's a lot easier and less expensive to address it. Okay. But, at the top end of the graph, after this infestation has been here for a while, it's gotten bigger. Okay. And it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time to get rid of it, which are limiting factors for local governments, people, and so and unfortunately, most people are aware of invasive species right in the middle, when it's on an exponential route to being being able to not contain it.
Actually, you've got a question here. Mm-hmm. Robert Jenke, one of my colleagues, said, do you have an opinion regarding the Enbridge Line 5? First of all, what is the Enbridge Line 5?
it's one of those areas that, it's a very political, like hot topic. So, I deal with more invasive species, so that's probably not, in my professional wheelhouse to really,
Okay.
to talk about. So I would say, at least for the Enbridge 5 line, it's definitely something that, no matter what you do, having the pipeline, underneath lakes and stuff, you really need to make sure that whatever happens, you take into account environmental issues and, upkeep and things of that nature. So I'm going to kind of volley that off a little bit because...
Well, because I'm going to come back with something, because that raises another issue.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess I could just, say that no matter what you do, you have to consider the environmental impact. You can't just take something and look at it from an economic standpoint. You have to factor in economy. I like jobs. I like, we all want to have a strong economy and environment and stuff, but we have to look at these issues from a holistic perspective.
Because I guess the issue that comes to mind is listening to you and responding to that question isn't so much that particular project, but how do you address that issue before you begin these projects? Oh, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, and I'll relate that question more to invasive species, and I think what needs to happen is that, before you start a project, before you do anything, construction, one of the things you need to look at is what kind of equipment is needed, what's the environmental ramifications to it, do you have a plan in place for what if something goes wrong? Okay. Do you have the means to address and to fix it, right? So I think you have to consider, some of these issues, and one of the things that's really important to do is to bring people from a variety of backgrounds to have different expertise. You need to bring in the economists, you need to bring in the scientists, you need to bring in the policymakers, you need to bring in the residents, who are going to be living in the area. And
who will be impacted?
Impacted, both direct, from a benefit standpoint and from a negative, from a con next. So you got to really bring in stakeholders to address these environmental issues, and don't be bringing in people at the end.
Okay.
You want, when you deal with environmental issues, you have to have all these stakeholders at the table at the beginning. You don't want to bring someone at the end just to rubber stamp it. Hey, we had that stakeholder group in that meeting. So before you do anything, you have to assemble your team.
Okay. The term that comes to mind is environmental impact statement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think for the first time in my life, I understand what that means now.
Yeah.
And why it has to be done up front. But we talked about another issue in the Japanese carp.
The Asian carp.
Asian carp. I'm sorry, forgive me. Share with it. I just find that story fascinating and that issue fascinating. How did that happen? What is that problem? And will they ever be able to resolve it?
And see, that's a problem. That's a situation that hasn't yet reached Michigan. It has So what Asian carp, there's at least a couple different types of carp. Like the silver carp, big head, and grass carp. And so they were brought in, and there's a couple reasons why people would want to have them. One, like some of these carp can clean up algae eaters, so they can clean up algae in a pond. Some communities will eat them. And so, they're also quite fun to fish for, right? Some of them are big fish, and you get that excitement. And so they have been around, and sometimes like these carp have been raised in these outdoor ponds. And so what also kind of happened, back then is you'd have these ponds filled with these fish, and a flood event occurred, and then some of those ponds overflowed, and they kind of got into the wild, so to speak. And so as they got in, some of them are quite big. Some of them, they're attracted to noise and the motor boats, and they'll jump, and they could actually hurt people. Right. You've seen pictures of them jumping up and slapping someone in the face.
Yeah, pretty hard.
Yeah, pretty hard, and they can knock a person down and hurt someone. Yeah. And they can also come in, and they can also change the environment because they're voracious eaters. They eat a lot. They can change the environment, make things a little murky, eat all the food, and outcompete the native species.
That was my question.
Yeah.
Because it disrupts the environmental table. Mm-hmm. How do you fix that? Because I know you were saying, and I agree, the problem should have been addressed up front, but now it hasn't been.
Yeah.
So we call in Dr. Singh.
Yeah.
Dr. Singh, fix this.
Right. I'm going to give an answer that's probably every child has heard, and all I know I've heard it is it's easier to prevent. It's cheaper to prevent a mistake from happening than having to fix it, right?
A stitch in
times
saves 9.
Yep, and then preventative action is important. So prevent it from becoming a problem in the first place. And then you're talking about, well, once it is a problem, a couple of things. One, you want to make sure it doesn't become a problem somewhere else. So make sure that you do your decontamination, education, and outreach to make sure that people know that this is here, and know how it's spread. So, it doesn't come to another problem. And then again, you got to look at depending on what the species. There's no one answer to it. It's like let's have an example. Like if you have how you would address a crayfish problem is different than how you would address an aquatic plant. How you would address like a bug is different than what you would deal with like a mammal. So you really have to, again, assemble a team, people who have experience with those species, and look at what your options are. Some of these species infestations occur in really high quality, pristine environments. You can't just go start throwing chemicals and getting rid of it, right? You have to be really careful. It's going to take time and effort to do, right? So you definitely have to take a step back and look at what the situation is and what your options are. And you also have to look at some of the cultural aspects of, what people are willing to tolerate. And we have a group of people out there who don't want to use herbicides. So if you take away that tool, what is your option?
Okay.
And so you have to, maybe look at things. And once you actually remove that invasive species, so here's another problem that I think a lot of people don't think about. You have a plant, I'm going to put a lot of herbicide, nuke it, get rid of it, and then I'm done, right? Well, if you don't do anything to that land or that area, something's going to come back. Whether it's that old species that you just got rid of, or something new is going to be opportunistic, right? So what are you going to do after? Are you going to maybe hopefully plant some native species, that are hardy, resistant?
Okay.
Or are you going to, continually monitor it? Maybe, I don't know, put grass, or I don't know, build it up. Or, like I said, make a trail out of it. You have to have a plan afterwards.
My question is this, and I'm going to go back to the Asian carp. Not that I'm a carp lover, but they get big. They compete with the natural flora for food. What happens to the natural species that are there?
Yeah, their populations can sometimes, decrease, because as you have this new species that comes in, if it's aggressive, it'll outcompete it for homes, and so therefore, the native species won't have an opportunity to mate and, lay their eggs somewhere. So it can get rid of the habitat for native species. And so you could also have a situation where this new species is bringing in a disease that the native species are not able to, fight off, and so they die from a disease. That has been, an issue in some cases. And again, sometimes you have this invasive species, they will eat the young of the native species. And so there's a lot of competition, from a variety of ways. Or they can actually change the environment in a way that the native species can't, live there anymore.
They could actually alter the habitat.
Yeah. Sometimes they're just, making it murky. They can maybe, change if they eat certain, vegetation. They're taking all that good stuff out. Maybe they're, changing the composition of species. So there could be several ways that they displace the native species.
Wow.
We haven't even talked about the red swamp crayfish.
And that's where I'm going next, because you know what, guys? She sent me this picture that's on the Lyons den, and it's a picture of her in these overalls in a swamp holding a crawdad. Now I call it a crawdad. She uses the appropriate name, crayfish.
Red swamp crayfish. Yeah.
I want to hear about that because I love crawdads.
Yeah, and so let me see. I have it's going to be hard to kind of see this, but I do have a picture of a crayfish. And for those of you at home, here's this one here. You can probably hold that up. And so the red swamp crayfish, a little bit of a glare there, but they're quite big, 2 to 5 inches long, and they have bright red bumps on them.
And they taste good.
Yep.
There, how's that?
Yeah, I think that looks good. And so, I mean, they're The body that you see, this is actually a lighter colored one. It's like a light brown, but they can be a little bit darker. So the key feature there that you want to look for is like the bright red bumps.
Okay.
And there's a couple other technical things, like the carapace and that kind of stuff. But all intents and purposes, let's just focus on the red bumps.
Okay.
And so this is a tasty problem.
It really is.
It's a problem, and they can potentially have some sort of disease to bring into the new population, especially when they come in here.
Okay.
Now the interesting thing is like how the heck did these species get here? We talked about this.
Yes, we did.
And sometimes that nice little science teacher you had in public school, they ordered a crayfish from the catalog and they brought it in, and then they had the classroom aquarium. Back then, you were able to actually order red swamp crayfish. And, at the end of the school year, nobody wanted to kill the class pet. Nobody wanted, I'm sure the parents didn't want you to take it home.
Don't eat it.
Yeah, eat it. Well, you could eat it, but who knows? And, the optimal feel-good story back then was, the classroom would have a very, nice pomp and circumstance procession, go to a nearby pond, and then just release that crayfish into the wild. All
Free Willy.
Free Willy crayfish version. And, over time, and you have a lot of people doing that every year, people had them as like pets or something.
Okay.
You can imagine, a couple of years got to move and nobody wants to lug a 50-gallon tank anywhere, so they're
Right.
dumping all these animals. Goldfish is another one. Plants, a lot of the aquatic plants are here because people are dumping their fish aquariums, and the fish died, but like the plant was able to
Right.
to grow. And I have a couple other examples.
Okay, please.
And so the red swamp crayfish is one of the classroom or innocent classroom teachers, did that. Also, they're very tasty. People eat them.
Mm-hmm.
So you used to be able to order them and then have your crayfish boiled and be able to buy them at a live, market.
Right.
And people would get them, and sometimes they would escape at the beach, if you're having your crayfish boil. Sometimes, a kid would take one and let it go, play with it and toss it away. And sometimes, people would use them as bait.
Yeah.
How many of you had some leftover crayfish from, a dinner that you didn't use?
Right.
Somebody didn't show up for your dinner, so you didn't want to cook it all at the same time.
Right.
And you went fishing, so you take it and, maybe you tipped your bucket, maybe, it got off the hook.
Right.
And so these,
Maybe you just dumped your bait.
or you just at the end, dump it. And so if you have bait, always throw it unused bait in the garbage.
Okay.
And it got released into the environment. So that's kind of how they got there. And they are pretty mobile. I mean, there are reports of it, scurrying across people's lawns. And so they are pretty mobile. And so that is a problem.
You raised an issue earlier when we talked about this that I thought was fascinating, because they're usually in warmer places like Louisiana, Alabama, etc.
Yeah.
But they managed to survive up here through Michigan winters.
Yep.
How in the world is that possible?
Yeah, they can burrow quite deep, and they can just go in, and then they can hang out over winter there. And we have native crayfish as well that burrow,
Okay.
and they're hardy creatures, so they can burrow, and because they are mobile, they can make its way into like drainage pipes, and they can find a way. But burrowing is one example of a way to escape the elements. Even goldfish, they'll find a warmer spot, maybe near the edge or the bottom of like a pond or a lake.
Okay.
Because it's the top that really freezes over, right?
Right.
But at the bottom, it may not freeze all the way through, so they may be able to chill out a little bit down there.
Chill out.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay.
I know, no pun intended. But yeah, so some of those species, are problematic in that sense. And I actually have a couple of things. So
Well, let's see.
I have another, since we're on the topic of aquatics, I am going to, and this is like a new calendar that we're going to have out, but this one's going to have a hard time, but you might want to focus on this small picture. This is European frogbit. And, if people are interested, I can always like take some pictures and post it, in the discussion,
Right.
tomorrow or something.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So that little white flower, those guys are cute, they're pretty. People would have them in their aquarium.
Okay.
And again, people would just dump their aquarium in, and then they'd come in. And this is actually problematic because it can like float on the top of your water column, like lakes and ponds, and it will grow. And this whole picture, actually, we'll have you get back up there again.
We have a young man here. George, will you hold that if you put the screen for us?
Thank you. And so you can see in that one picture, that's a huge infestation. The big one. Yeah. So you can look at that. That's like all that plant.
Wow.
there's not a lot of light that's making its way to the bottom, right? So any plant that's on the bottom is probably not getting enough light that it needs. Thank you.
So what does that have? Not just on the plant life, but
Yeah.
it has to affect other life there as well.
Yeah, so plants, I mean, so it shades, it prevents the sun from reaching the plants at the bottom, so
Okay.
that's one. And then if all these plants die, they're all gonna like sink to the bottom, and all these things have, you know, a lot of carbon in it, right? So they're
Right.
gonna break down, and you're gonna have a sudden carbon influx. So
Okay.
it can change, you know, the concentration of oxygen in the water that can cause fish kills. You know, things break down, it releases. So that's one problem. But also it can impact our quality of life, right? Because if you like to kayak or canoe, let me tell you, having to like move through like, you know, lily pads and these kind of things,
Right.
it takes a lot of muscle, right? It hurts. it makes water recreation not fun anymore.
Okay.
And it can also clog up your motorboat engines and
Okay.
get all over places. So you definitely don't want this. And one of the things we ask people if they're going to go fishing, duck hunting, make sure that when you leave, you're checking your waders, your gear, your boats for these kinds of vegetation. It's actually illegal to transport, you know, your boats and trailers with stuff hanging off of them. You have to make sure that all that stuff is, you know, wiped off or picked off before you leave.
I was going to ask you.
That's relatively new.
Do you advise that if you got a 30 footer is one thing,
Mhm.
but if you have a boat that you take back and forth to different lakes,
Mhm.
that you take it to the car wash and spray it down?
Yeah, you can go to a car wash. You can, well, first of all, you know, you got to take all that stuff hanging off, right? So you got to
Okay.
take it off, and you know, you could also put it in the power car wash, hose it down, wipe things down. We have something called clean, drain, dry. So you can always wipe things down,
Okay.
you know, especially your kayaks and stuff. Use a
Okay.
pressure hose. And some places may have a boat wash station that you could access. Some
Right.
do not. But definitely pick off anything that you can, wipe things down is something that we suggest. You know, wakeboards, kayaks, canoes, you know, fishing gear, waders, you know, that kind of stuff.
But you say it's actually against the law to take it out of the water with stuff hanging off it, though.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a penalty.
Yeah. And I don't think they enforced it the first year. They're phasing it in, but you definitely can't be moving things with plants hanging off. So
Okay.
that is another thing. Well, let's see. Let's talk about, and I won't spend too much time on these things because I, you know, in interest of time. But here's a beautiful one. This is, I can actually hold this one up as well. This is our cover. This is our cover shot. These are beautiful, graceful mute swans.
They are beautiful.
They are beautiful, and people, you know, managers have a tough time convincing people to get rid of these swans because these mute swans. Actually, I'll just hold up the cover. These guys are aggressive. they can also tear up they eat a lot. You know, I think 8 pounds of vegetation, 6 to 8 pounds a day.
A day?
Yeah, and they can, you know, can imagine like what goes in must come out. So they're,
Oh,
you know, they
yeah.
also are, pardon the pun, fouling
Yes.
the water quality, and so they can change the environment. You know, they're, you know, eating all this stuff, destroying, you know, killing roots, you know, pulling out the entire root system, and, you know, damaging plants, driving away native ducks who live there.
Right.
Because especially when they have young, I mean, they're very protective, and
Yeah.
it's not their fault. I mean, they're just doing what, you know, they're going to do. They want
Right.
to eat, protect their young, and then, you know, reproduce and whatnot. So they do tend to drive away native species. And so if you see a swan with like an orange beak, that's, you know, red, orange means caution. So
Okay.
stay
Yeah.
away from them.
I've actually read about them attacking people.
Yeah, they attack people.
And they can do some harm.
They can do a lot of damage. They are quite big. If you've walked up close to them, they are quite an impressive bird.
Okay.
I do not want to be attacked by a swan.
Where
But here's a challenge, though. I know I'm going to cut you off here, but
Okay.
I don't have an answer for this. But the problem that you have is when you have a species like this, you know, it's beautiful, people get attached to it. And so as a policymaker, as a scientist, you know, you go tell someone like, hey, we want to, you know, kill or remove that swan from your, you know, neighborhood pond. You know, people are going to get upset. You know, you have this, you know, this beautiful animal, and it's not their fault that they're there. You know, they're going to do what they need to do. So navigating, you know, invasive species from a variety of perspectives, it can be quite challenging. You know, people will get angry if you remove them, but then other people will get mad at you if you let them stay there. So it can get really complex
So how do you
for
fix
for
that?
some of these species.
That's fascinating because it's a real problem.
Hmm.
It has to be addressed,
Yep.
but they are beautiful.
Yeah, they are beautiful.
And Americans, we are into aesthetics.
Hmm.
So how do you tell the property owner, we want to euthanize your beautiful bird?
Right. And I think this is an issue that a lot of people won't touch with a 10-foot pole, because it is very controversial. And the best that for someone like me, my organization, the best we can do is we can do education and outreach. Like, here's the animal. Don't encourage it. Like, don't
Okay.
feed these animals and make them want to come back. And the best we can do is like just talk about some of the pros and cons of these species. And you cannot discount, we live in a society where you can't discount, cultural aspects and the beauty of aesthetics, that's important to some.
It is.
People make their livelihood out of it. So, it's very complex. So you can imagine having to deal with these issues, it can get quite tough.
Wow. Share this with me.
Yeah.
Because we talked about this earlier, and I know I'm going to get to this earlier, but this is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
You are, one of your missions
Mm-hmm.
is to encourage women of color in
Yeah.
science.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
talk
one of my
about that.
personal goals, actually.
Okay.
Like, I definitely want to see more youth out there and get involved in science and education as well. And I do want to see people from a variety of groups that don't have the background advance in this kind of field. And what I mean by that is you have people from a variety of backgrounds. I want to see that farming kid comes from 5 generations of farming. I want to see that kid also get involved in environmental science, learn, maybe incorporate some of that into the family farms and give them an opportunity. I want to see, like more Black and brown children involved in science, and to show that, this could be a viable career. And, when I was growing up, I didn't see a lot of scientists in the field that looked like me.
Okay.
So I was growing up, and this is actually a lot of people will may agree with me, but when they go to school in science, like, a lot of parents want their kids to be like the big 5, doctor, engineer, lawyer, business owner, or a dentist.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids like spend a lot of time like trying to achieve those goals, but there are a lot of careers in science that could benefit from people with different backgrounds and different eyes and ears and experiences.
Are there places in this field? I mean, is it a growing field?
Mhm.
Okay. Tell me about that.
You're right. Invasive species, I mean, it started off with a couple, the zebra mussel, the sea lamprey,
Yeah.
and now it seems that there's so many other species coming in. And so, unfortunately, we're always going to have, new species coming and going. So in that sense, it is getting, to be, there's a lot of work in this area. There's a variety of things you can do. There's research. I have colleagues, they, at MSU, they do some really high quality research on, what's the best way to capture some of these invasive species. What's the, some people do human dimensions research. What are people's attitudes towards these invasive species? And so if you really have a passion, you have questions that you want to, help answer, you could go in the research route. You could also go in management. You could be someone like me who does education and outreach, and who's playing in the water, looking for weeds and bugs that nobody wants. Like I enjoy that kind of thing. I would just urge students to like think about their options, and if they have questions, reach out to different people, ask questions of like how. Do you have any tips or like, suggestions? Like, none of us can actually give someone a job. That's kind of hard, right? But we can definitely provide suggestions and, encourage teachers to take a portion of their classroom time, maybe to finish a lecture or finish a unit and talk about some of the different jobs available.
Okay.
Not everybody is going to be, graduate with a fisheries and wildlife degree and just count fish, right? Or count deer.
Right.
There's a lot of different, jobs. And you just have to familiarize yourselves.
Now share this with me, because I don't want to screw this up.
Mm-hmm.
I have to read it. You are with JLWCISMA.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
What is that?
JLW is Jackson Lenawee Washtenaw, and the CISMA is Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And the good news is that there is someone like me that covers all the counties in Michigan. And there are groups like mine, all over the state, or all over the country as well. They could be called something different, like maybe a weed management area, because they deal with more weeds. But there is someone like me. I cover these 3 counties. I have another colleague that covers, like 3 more counties, and then someone that covers 4, someone that covers 5. There's a few, there's a UP, and, they vary. Each SISMA is different in the sense that it has different goals and objectives. It may focus on different species because what's a problem here may not be a problem over there. And so this is a really cool program because we all, we're all like colleagues in the sense. So if someone is dealing with a problem, we can alert other people, hey, this is coming your way. We can help each other identify things. We can, maybe talk to other people in different states. Like, hey, well, for example, Japanese stilt grass. It's a grass that was actually, it's from Asia, and it was used as packing material for porcelain. So you can imagine they used to pack their stuff with this, the leaves of this grass species. And then in Tennessee, I think in like 1910 or so, they found it. And ever since then, if you look at the early detection rapid response maps, it's just covered, the all like the eastern, states, and
Wow.
we have it here in a couple spots. And so, someone probably just dumped out their packing material in the compost and may have had seeds in it, and now we have a big problem. And I think I have. Okay, I do have one more that I want to show. This is called Mile a Minute Weed, and I can just kind of. You can hold this up a little bit. We don't have this in Jackson yet. It has been found in Calhoun County,
Okay.
and it's a mile a minute weed. It grows really quickly. And this is kind of interesting because it has recurved barbs, right? So along the stem, on the edge of the edge of the leaves,
Right.
it has these barbs. So it's growing this way, but the barbs are curved downwards. And you can kind of see in the picture, but we can maybe share that later.
Okay.
The curve down, so it kind of like is able to grip something and propel itself up, and it's easy to climb up over trees, and it can suppress. And you can see this picture. I think we showed it.
Yes.
It can like cover. It can smother stuff. It can smother different. Oh, that's a sign. It can smother, trees. It can climb on top of it, and the weight of it can collapse some weaker trees. It's got some really beautiful. Unfortunately, a lot of invasive species are beautiful.
Okay.
People come in, they plant them in their gardens, and so you can kind of see. This like little blueberries in the corner, and birds. And that's with some of these species. Birds will eat the berries, and they'll again eat it, and then they'll drop it somewhere else through their
And
feces.
seeds are in feces.
Yeah, and they're viable. And some of these seeds, they can last a couple years in the soil. So, yeah, that's another thing that
So it seems to me the issue with invasive, the invasive issues, it's more of a control. You're never going to get a real handle on it.
There's always something coming to take its place.
Yes.
And what we can do, though, is be aware of what we're doing, practice best management, and understand that some of these rules that we have in place, it's not because we're trying to be mean. And, like some of those, if you're, here's a good story. You have a lot of people going to different countries, right? And they see a beautiful plant. Well, we have laws that says you can't just bring these live specimens over, right? Seeds. Because those packages of seeds, like those maybe a bag of lentils, you took from your village, and you're like, you can't get it over here.
Right.
It may have bugs in it, which is fine. The bugs live in there, and then you just wash it off and you eat it.
Yeah.
Well, you bring it over here, maybe it's gonna like jump out and is able to live in the environment here, right? And it becomes a problem. If you have materials that have been stored outside in a different country, maybe or even if a different state, egg masses, bugs can lay their eggs on something,
Right.
and then you move it, bring it to somewhere else, and then when it's warm enough, it'll hatch. We're having that problem with, we don't have it here yet, but the spotted lanternfly, a beautiful insect from Asia, and there's a lot of species, they're coming from all over, they're Europe, Asia, Africa,
Right.
Latin America. So we live in a global society, and with these changes and modifications, we have to adapt our practices and be aware. Like I said, 20 years ago, going to India, for me was a treat. It was expensive. You couldn't do that. But now, ticket prices, maybe people have, more income. They're able to travel more frequently, more areas, right? So you never know.
Dr. Singh.
Oh, and I also want to say some invasive species have also come in here because back in the 70s and the 80s, we didn't have a full understanding of how bad some of these species could be. So you had agencies, planting things like autumn olive, buckthorn, because they thought it would be a good habitat for birds,
Right.
stabilize the the soil, but they got out of control, and we didn't.
So some of the things that came here, we brought them here intentionally.
Yep.
But we just didn't have a full understanding.
Exactly.
Okay. Wow. I told you she was going to be worth the hour. Dr. Singh, I'm going to give you the last word, please.
Yeah. Now, you put me on the spot. Like, how do I want to end this? I guess I'll say this. Just be aware. And if you have any questions, definitely contact the JLW SYSMA. We're here to answer your questions. We can, come to classrooms and do presentations.
Okay.
If you send an email, with pictures of like, hey, what the heck is this plant? How do I get rid of it? We also help, in terms of identification and helping you figure out how to get rid of something.
But do me a favor.
Yeah.
Give them a phone number.
Yeah, the office is 517-395-2089.
One more time.
517-395-2089.
And the email address, if you have one.
Yeah, my email address is, and I'll say this, it's shikha.singh
Okay.
at macd.org. So it's SHIKHA dot SINGH at macd.org.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah. And I also want to give a shout out to, I am personally housed in the Jackson County Conservation District office.
Okay.
And I really urge your viewers to reach out and take a look at some of the awesome programs that our office is doing. We have a lot of good work that's going on with farmers. We have a great, my colleague does a lot of recycling programs and household hazardous waste, education and outreach, our federal partners. I mean, we all work together, engaging with the community in different ways. So please check us out, and there's a lot more smarter people in my office than I am.
I'll believe that.
So definitely take advantage of our office because we're here to serve the community. So we want you to be aware.
There you have it. Guys, I appreciate you. We appreciate Dr. Singh taking the time to come in here and drop some real knowledge on us about some very real things and some very real concerns, and we do appreciate that. Next week, Thursday, 7 o'clock, we're going to have Mayor Dobies with us. Please come join us right here, 7 o'clock, in the, where else? In the Lyons Den, right?
Yeah.
There we have it. Good night, guys. Press the